The night was dark and cold. Rain poured down from the sky like it would never stop. Thunder echoed through the hills and the muddy road was empty. Only one building had lights on. A small, rusty workshop made of metal sheets and broken dreams. Inside, a man named John sat alone, fixing a broken engine with shaking hands. He had a short beard, tired eyes, and oil on his clothes. The workshop smelled like smoke, grease, and old memories. John had no family, no friends, just his tools and a bed in the corner. He lived a simple life, one day at a time. But that night, everything changed. There was a knock at the door, soft and weak. Almost lost in the sound of the rain, John paused, looked up, and listened again. Another knock, a little stronger this time. He wiped his hands and opened the door slowly. Outside in the rain stood two small figures. They were girls. Alien. Girls no older than 10, maybe. They were soaking wet, their skin pale blue and shivering. One of them had a torn blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The other hugged herself tightly. They looked up at him with glowing eyes, full of fear and hunger. John didn't ask where they came from. He didn't shout or turn them away. Instead, he opened the door wide and said, "Come in." The girls stepped inside quietly, leaving wet footprints on the metal floor. John grabbed an old towel and started drying their heads. He moved quickly, not saying much. He had seen pain before and he knew when someone needed help. He gave them each a dry shirt from his closet, too big, but warm. Then he lit the small fire in the corner and placed them near it. They sat quietly, eyes wide, not speaking a word. John went to the kitchen area and looked at what little he had. 1 can of soup, 2 old potatoes, and half a loaf of bread. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He boiled the soup, cut the bread, and served the food on 2 metal plates. The girls stared at the meal for a second as if they couldn't believe it was real. Then slowly, they started eating. Their hands trembled, but their faces showed relief with every bite. John sat across from them, watching. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, he just let them eat in peace. After dinner, the smaller girl walked to a shelf and picked up a small wooden box. Inside was an old photo of John's parents, and a little rock with strange symbols on it. She pointed at the rock and whispered something in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was soft, almost musical. Then she smiled, a real, warm smile, and returned the rock to its place. John didn't know what it meant, but he felt something in his chest. A connection, like this moment was bigger than it seemed. Later, he laid out 2 old sleeping bags near the fire. The girls, curled up together, holding hands before sleeping. The taller one stood and walked to John. She looked into his eyes, then bowed her head. It was a gesture of deep respect. John gently placed his hand on her shoulder and nodded. No words were needed. The workshop, once cold and empty, now felt warm. Not just from the fire, but from something deeper, something human. That night, John stayed up late watching the fire. He didn't know who the girls were or where they had come from, but something inside him told him they were special. He didn't know if they would stay or leave. He didn't expect anything in return. He just wanted them to feel safe for one night. One warm meal, one roof, one fire. That was all he could give. And somehow, it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. By morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, but the air felt fresh. John opened his eyes and looked toward the fire. The sleeping bags were empty. The girls were gone. He rushed to the door, stepped outside, and looked around. No footprints, no sign, nothing. It was like they had vanished into the mist. But when he walked back in, he saw something on the table. The small carved rock, the one from his shelf, was now glowing faintly, and next to it was another rock, shaped like a leaf, with new symbols on it. John picked it up, turned it over, and stared at the marks. He didn't understand what they meant, but deep inside he knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. 10 years passed like pages in a forgotten book. The world changed, but John's life stayed the same. He still lived in the same rusty workshop on the edge of the small colony town. He still fixed old engines, welding broken parts and wiping grease from his hands. People still called him Grease John. and some still mocked him for being poor. But he didn't mind. He never cared what people thought, because deep down, he remembered that one rainy night. The night two strange girls changed his life. Every morning John woke up, made strong black coffee, and looked at the shelf. There sat the two rocks. The first one dull and brown, the second shaped like a leaf, glowing softly. He didn't know what the symbols meant, but he never threw them away. They were proof that it had really happened, that he had once helped. Two orphan girls with glowing eyes, and maybe, just maybe, they remembered him too. Sometimes he asked around the colony if anyone had seen the girls. No one had. Sometimes he stared up at the stars at night, wondering if they were still out there. Had they been taken, saved, lost? He didn't know. He only knew that when they looked at him that night, there was something in their eyes, something more than fear, more than hunger, something like hope. The years weren't kind to John. His knees got weaker, and his hands shook more than before. Business slowed down as newer, cleaner shops opened closer to the center of town. People wanted fast repairs, cheap parts, and cold transactions. They didn't want old John's quiet honesty and homemade coffee. Still, he kept working. He kept fixing things that others threw away. He didn't earn much, but he always had enough to eat, enough to keep the lights on, and enough to make a warm meal if someone ever knocked again, but no one did. The door stayed quiet. Only the wind knocked now, and sometimes the rain. At night, he often sat in his old chair, looking at the fire and thinking about that night. He remembered the way the taller girl had bowed her head, the way the younger one had smiled at the carved rock. He didn't know their names, but he remembered their faces like they were carved into his mind. He wondered if they had families now, if they were safe, if they had food every day. He hoped they did. One day, a group of traders came through the colony. They had fancy clothes and loud laughter. John offered to repair one of their damaged skimmers, and they agreed. While he worked, he overheard them talking about the royal planets, far-off places filled with shining cities and alien empires. One trader mentioned something strange. "There's a rumor," he said, "about two alien queens who came from nowhere. No royal blood. No lineage, just showed up 10 years ago and now control half the stars. They say they came from dirt, from nothing. They never speak of their past, only that they owe their lives to a human." John stopped turning his wrench. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He just listened and kept working. But later, when he sat by the fire again, he thought about that rumor. Could it be them? Could those girls have become something great? He looked at the glowing rock on his shelf and smiled. He didn't need to know for sure. He didn't need thanks or reward. He just wanted them to be alive and happy. That night, for the first time in years, he took the second rock and held it in his hands. The glow was warmer now, like a heartbeat. He placed it near the fire and whispered, "I hope you're okay." Then he closed his eyes and slept peacefully. Time went on. The colony grew. Buildings became taller, machines became smarter, and the sky filled with more ships than clouds. But no ship ever came for John, and he never asked for one. People often forgot he was even there, until someone's engine broke beyond repair, or when a traveler needed help in the middle of the night. Then they found their way to the edge of town, to the old man in the rusted workshop, the man who asked for little and gave a lot. The man who never bragged, never boasted, and never spoke of the two rocks on his shelf. They didn't know what those rocks meant. They didn't know he had once saved two lost girls with a bowl of soup and a kind heart. But the universe remembered, and somewhere far above, among the stars and palaces and spaceships of glass and gold, two powerful women watched quietly and waited for the right moment to return, because kindness, true kindness, is never forgotten, even if it takes years. Even if the world moves on, the heart remembers, and one day, everything would change again. It was a quiet morning like any other. The air was cool, the sky a soft gray, and the wind carried the smell of rain. John stood outside his old workshop holding a mug of coffee in both hands. The world was waking up slowly. Vendors opening, stalls, kids rushing to school, and hover cycles humming along the dusty roads. No one paid attention to the old man in the worn-out coat, sipping bitter coffee with shaky hands. He didn't expect anything special from the day, but the universe had a different plan. It started with a sound. Low at first, like a distant hum coming from the clouds. Then it grew louder, deeper, like the sky itself was trembling. People stopped in the streets and looked up. Shadows stretched across the ground as something massive moved overhead. Children pointed, traders dropped their goods, and someone screamed. High above the colony, a spaceship appeared. Not just any ship. It was massive, smooth, and glowing with gold and silver lights. The bottom of the ship reflected the entire town like a mirror in the sky. There were no engines visible, no weapons, no markings, just pure, silent power floating above them. John squinted, shielding his eyes from the glare. His coffee slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground. His heart pounded, not from fear but from something else. A strange feeling, like a string inside him had just been pulled. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away. And then the ship began to move. Slowly descending from the clouds, the entire colony froze. Children clutched their mothers, guards raised old rifles, and drones buzzed nervously in the air. No one knew what to do. Was it an invasion? A royal visit? A punishment? People whispered theories, but no one moved. Then a ramp extended from the bottom of the ship, touching down gently right outside John's workshop. The metal road glowed softly as if inviting someone to step forward. All eyes turned to John. The old man stood still, confused. Why was the ship landing at his door? He took a step back, but the ramp shimmered again, as if calling him by name. Before he could speak, two figures appeared at the top of the ramp. They walked down slowly, dressed in royal robes that flowed like water. Their skin was the color of the stars, soft blue with a faint silver glow. Their eyes glowed golden, bright like twin suns. John gasped. He knew those eyes, even though 10 years had passed, and they were now grown, tall, and elegant. He knew them. It was the girls, the two orphans from that rainy night. They stepped onto the ground and walked straight to him. Their movements were graceful, almost floating. The taller one held something in her hands, a small carved rock, shaped like a leaf, glowing with the same light as the one on his shelf. The younger one had tears in her eyes, though her face remained calm and strong. They stopped just in front of him. And then, in front of the entire colony, they bowed. The taller one spoke, her voice soft but powerful. 10 cycles ago, you gave us warmth when we were cold, food when we were starving, and kindness when we were afraid. You gave without asking who we were, what we could give back, or if we even belonged here. We were nobodies, lost and forgotten. But you made us feel human. John stood frozen, his lips trembled, but he said nothing. The younger woman stepped forward and gently placed the glowing rock into his hands. We are Ilara and Naira now, she said, ambassadors of the Twin Realms, guardians of the Spiral Treaty, leaders of the Starlight Accord. But before that, we were just two girls who sat by your fire. And today we've come home. The crowd around them was silent. No one could believe what they were seeing. The old man with grease on his sleeves was being honored by two royal alien leaders. The guards lowered their weapons, the traders bowed their heads, and even the children went quiet. Something had shifted in the air. Respect, awe, and something. Close to magic surrounded the scene. John finally found his voice. I only gave you soup, he whispered. Ilara smiled. Yes, she said, and that soup saved our lives. Now we offer you something more. She stepped aside and raised her hand. A hologram appeared behind her, showing a new planet. Lush, green and untouched. Mountains, oceans, cities of crystal, and towers that reached into the sky. This world is yours if you want it, she said, a gift from the orphans you saved. John stared at the image, then looked back at the two women. He didn't understand how his small act of kindness could lead to something so huge. But he didn't need to understand, he just felt it, deep in his chest like a fire that never died. Tears filled his eyes, and for the first time in years he smiled without sadness. The sky had cracked open, not with war or fear, but with memory, with love and with return, and nothing in the world would ever be the same again. John stood still, the glowing rock warm in his hands. Around him, the whole colony watched in silence, unsure if they were dreaming or awake. The same old man who once lived quietly in a rusted workshop now stood before two powerful alien leaders. But to him, they were still just the two scared girls he had. Once found in the rain, he didn't know what to say. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then Nira stepped forward and gently took his hand. "Come," she said softly. "It's your turn to be taken care of." Before John could respond, the ramp behind them shimmered again. Ilara nodded, and Nira guided him slowly up toward the ship. Each step felt unreal, like he was walking into a dream. He turned once to look back at the people watching him. Some had tears in their eyes, others bowed their heads. The man they had once ignored or mocked was now being led into a starship by royalty. The doors of the ship opened silently as he stepped inside. The air inside was warm and sweet. It smelled like wildflowers and sunlight. The walls glowed with soft light, and the floors felt like clouds under his boots. John's eyes widened. He had never seen anything like this. Floating lights danced across the ceiling, and soft music hummed in the background. It wasn't just a ship. It felt alive, peaceful, welcoming, like it had been waiting just for him. Nira led him through shining hallways with glass-like walls that showed stars outside. He saw planets, moons, and entire systems passing by in the distance. Everything felt too big, too bright, too much. But the sisters stayed close, speaking. Gently, they didn't treat him like a guest or a stranger. They treated him like family. Ilara opened a door, and inside was a small room filled with glowing memories. Holograms floated in the air. Images from the past. John saw himself handing over the steaming bowls of soup. He saw the girls shivering by the fire, wrapped in his old blankets. He saw himself falling asleep on the chair, guarding them silently. He saw every small act he had done that night, now replayed with soft light and quiet music. Tears filled John's eyes. He had forgotten some of those moments, but they hadn't. They had remembered everything. "Why did you keep all this?" he asked, his voice cracking. Ilara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because it was the beginning of everything," she said. "Because one warm meal changed the path of stars." They sat down in the middle of the memory room. Nira brought out a tray of food, not alien food, but real old-fashioned soup, bread, and roasted potatoes. John stared at it in disbelief. "It's just like the meal I made you," he whispered. "We never forgot the taste," Nira said with a smile. "We spent years trying to copy it." John laughed, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. The soup smelled exactly like it did 10 years ago. He took a spoonful, and for a moment time stopped. It tasted of warmth, kindness, and long-lost memories. It tasted like home. After the meal, Ilara stood and raised her hand. A new hologram appeared in the air. A world, green and beautiful, full of oceans, forests, and glowing cities. "This world is yours now," she said. "We built it in your name. It will be a place of peace where kindness leads, not war. You will be its heart, its guide." John looked at the planet and then back at them. "I'm just a mechanic," he whispered. "I fix old engines and drink bitter coffee." Nira stepped forward and touched his chest. "You gave us more than food," she said. "You gave us worth. You gave us a reason to live, to grow, to rise. And now we offer you the same." The ship moved quietly through the stars as they spoke. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a return, a homecoming, a full circle closing. John was no longer just the man who lived on the edge of a colony. He was now the center of a story that stretched across galaxies. In that moment, he understood. Sometimes, the smallest kindness grows into something no one can imagine. Sometimes, the softest words and the simplest acts are the ones that change the future. And now, because of one night long ago, he was part of something far bigger than himself. As the ship turned toward the stars, Nira looked at him and asked, "Are you ready to begin your new life?" John smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Yes, he said. Let's go. The ship glided through space like a silent dream. Stars floated by the wide glass windows and planets shimmered in the distance. John sat in a golden chair inside a crystal chamber, still unsure if this was real. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He looked around the room, where soft lights moved across the walls like dancing fireflies. Ilara and Naira stood before him now, no longer the small, hungry girls he once fed. They looked like queens, graceful, calm, and powerful, but their eyes still held that same warmth, that same quiet gratitude. Ilara placed a small sphere on the table, and it opened. A beam of light rose into the air, showing a swirling timeline of stars and empires. Then, slowly, the truth began to unfold. We weren't just orphans, she said gently. We were heirs to a kingdom that no longer exists. John leaned forward, his brow furrowing. Naira stepped in beside her sister, her voice soft but steady. Our home was destroyed during the Great Fracture War, she said. Our parents, the Star King and the Dream Mother, were killed by traitors. We were hidden away in escape pods, scattered across the galaxy to survive, Ilara continued. We were supposed to be found by allies, but something went wrong. Our pod malfunctioned and landed on a backwater planet, your colony. No one knew where we were, and no one came. For days we wandered, hiding, starving, alone. Until we saw the light from your workshop. John's breath caught in his throat. He remembered that rainy night, the way the girls had looked, tired, wet, scared. He had thought they were just two unlucky kids. But now, he was looking at the last living daughters of a fallen empire. You were royalty, he whispered, and I gave you soup. Naira smiled, her eyes glowing softly. And that soup gave us life, purpose, and warmth when we had nothing left. The hologram changed, showing the girls being taken in by a secret society hidden among the stars. A group called the Spiral Guardians, keepers of peace and history. They raised Ilara and Naira, trained them in diplomacy, battle, leadership, and languages. But no matter how far they rose, they never forgot where their second life began. We told the Guardians about you, said Ilara, about the human who helped us without asking for anything. They watched you for years quietly. They made sure you were safe. John looked down at the table, stunned. All these years, he had been alone, or so he thought. But in the shadows, someone had been watching, protecting, remembering, all because of one meal and a warm fire. We built our strength in secret, said Naira. We rebuilt fleets, forged alliances, restored peace to old enemies. We became leaders, but not through bloodline. We became leaders because we carried a simple truth. Kindness matters. And now we lead not just because of who we were, but because of who you were to us. John felt something shift inside him. The world he had known was small, his tools, his workshop, his fire. But now he saw how even the smallest action could ripple through the stars. You could have forgotten me, he said quietly. You could have moved on. We couldn't, Ilara said, her voice firm. We made a promise that night. That if we ever found power, we'd use it to honor the man who showed us what humanity really means. Naira reached behind her and pulled out a box wrapped in light. She placed it in John's hands and motioned for him to open it. Inside was a medal, shaped like a flame and a leaf together. The symbol of the twin realms, their new empire. We offer you this, she said. The flame leaf medal, the highest honor in our realm. Only one has ever been made, and it's yours. John stared at the medal, eyes filling with tears. He never imagined a moment like this. He never dreamed that two scared girls would become leaders of galaxies, and that they'd return to thank the man who had simply done the right thing. But it's not just a medal, Ilara said. It's also your seal. With it, you can speak in our name, walk among rulers, and bring peace where others bring war. You are not just remembered, Nira added. You are part of our legacy now. John took a deep breath and looked out the window. Stars moved slowly, past calm and silent. He thought of the people back home, the ones who laughed at him, the ones who forgot him. And then he thought of that rainy night, the way the girls had smiled, and he knew it had all been worth it. This was no longer a story about two orphans. It was a story about what kindness could become, a story about a mechanic who didn't ask for reward, but changed the stars anyway. And now that truth was written in the light of every world the sisters touched, and in every heart that learned their story. The ship slowed as it approached. The glowing planet from the viewing deck, John saw it spinning in space like a jewel, green, blue, and wrapped in soft clouds. The ocean sparkled. The forest glowed under golden light, and strange birds flew through the pink skies. It didn't look like any world John had seen in his old travel books. It looked like something out of a dream. A peaceful dream where nothing was broken, and everything could heal. Nira placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as he stared in silence. This world is called Yalara, she said. It means gift of the forgotten in our ancient tongue. Ilara stepped beside her and added, It belongs to you now, not just in name, but in spirit. John blinked, unsure of how to respond. He had lived in a rusty workshop most of his life. Now they were giving him a planet. The ship landed softly in a wide garden of glowing trees and silver grass. Birds sang melodies that sounded like flutes, and the wind smelled like honey and fresh rain. A team of attendants, alien and human alike, waited near a crystal path, bowing with respect as John stepped out. He walked slowly, taking it all in, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. This wasn't a place built by war or wealth. This was a place built with love. The sisters guided him through tall archways into a home unlike any other. It wasn't a palace full of gold or riches. It was warm, simple, and filled with memories. Photos of that rainy night were framed on glowing panels. John's fire, the soup pot, even the old workshop, all recreated in soft detail. In the center of the living space sat the same rocking chair he used to sit in. Ilara smiled when she saw him notice. We rebuilt it exactly, she said. Every scratch, every spot. It's yours. John touched the armrest, his hand trembling. This was not just a home. This was a thank you that spanned galaxies. He looked around and saw something else too. His tools, cleaned and polished, arranged neatly on a bench near the window. If you ever feel like fixing things again, Nira said softly, we made sure you'd have everything. Over the next few days, John met visitors from distant planets, ambassadors, warriors, poets, and scientists. They all came with one goal, to meet the human who had changed everything. Some called him the Flame Giver, others, Father of the Two Sons. But to John, those names felt too big. He just smiled, nodded politely, and offered them tea. He started planting flowers in the garden, waking up early to tend the trees. He learned the names of the alien birds, and even taught a few kids how to build tiny gliders from scrap. He laughed more, ate better, and slept without the cold ache in his bones. People who had never known poverty asked him for wisdom. Soldiers asked him about peace. Leaders asked him how to lead with kindness, and his answer was always simple. Give what you can, even when it's small, even when it hurts. One evening, the sisters held a grand feast in his honor. The entire valley lit up with floating lanterns and soft music. Tables stretched across the hilltops, covered in food from every star system. But when it was time, for John's meal, they served him one simple bowl of soup, 2 potatoes, and a slice of bread. He chuckled softly and looked at Ilara. Still remember the recipe, huh? We never forgot, she said, smiling. How could we? After the meal, a stage rose from the earth and children performed a play. It was the story of 2 orphan girls, a rainy night, and a kind human who gave them a home. John watched with wet eyes as the children acted it out with love and laughter. When it ended, the crowd stood in silence, then erupted in cheers. John was called to the stage, and for the first time in his life, he didn't shrink back. He stood tall, looked out at the faces lit by lanterns and stars, and said just one thing. "I didn't save them," he said. "They saved me too." From that day on, John became more than a legend. He became a symbol of a new way, one where kindness was power, and love was leadership. His name was carved into the roots of the great tree of peace, planted by the sisters on the highest hill of Yalara, and visitors from every world sat beneath its branches, learning the story of the man who gave, and never asked for anything back. At night, when the stars shone bright, John would sit on his porch sipping warm tea and watching the twin moons rise, and sometimes, just sometimes, he would hear a knock on the door. He would open it slowly, hoping for a memory, but whether it was real or not, he would always smile and say, "Come in, it's warm here." Years passed and time moved like a gentle breeze on the planet Yalara. Seasons came and went. The trees grew taller, the birds sang new songs, and the stars above continued their slow dance. But one thing never changed. John's home on the Maui hill, built from memory and kindness, it remained a place of peace and light. Visitors still came from far away, some traveling across entire galaxies just to see the man who gave everything with a bowl of soup. But John had grown older now. His beard whiter, his steps slower, his hands softer, and yet his eyes still held the same light they did the night he opened his door to two orphan girls in the rain. Every morning he sat on his wooden porch, drinking warm tea, wrapped in a soft robe made by the sisters themselves. He watched the sunrise. With a quiet heart, beside him sat the two carved rocks, one from the rainy night, the other from the spaceship. They sat on a table between two cups, like old friends sharing stories without speaking. Children would visit him in the afternoon, alien and human alike. They sat cross-legged on the grass as he told stories, not about war or kings or treasure, but about small acts, silent kindness, and what it meant to care for someone who could give you nothing in return. He never told them he was famous. He never mentioned the flame-leaf medal kept in a box under his bed. To them, he was simply Uncle John, the man who had once fixed old machines and now fixed broken hearts with his words. One evening, a little alien girl with glowing silver eyes asked him, "Uncle John, is it true you were poor before you came here?" John chuckled softly and looked at the sky. "Not poor," he said. "I just didn't have much." "But you gave food to the princesses," the girl said, "even when you were hungry." John nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "because being kind doesn't wait for perfect timing." The next day, Alara and Naira visited again. They didn't arrive in a golden ship or with royal guards. They came quietly, walking along the path like daughters returning home. They wore simple clothes, their hair braided with leaves from Yalara's trees. John smiled when he saw them and opened his arms. "You're late," he said, laughing gently. Naira hugged him tight. "We got lost in time," she whispered, "but we never forgot the way back." That evening they sat together on the porch, drinking tea and watching the twin moons rise. Ilara spoke first, her voice soft. "John, we want to do something in your name, something permanent. We've built ships, cities, and even statues, but we want something that will live inside people." John tilted his head and listened. "A school," Naira said. "A place where young ones from every race can learn kindness, empathy, and compassion. Not just science and trade, but heart. And we want to name it after you." John didn't speak for a long time, then he nodded slowly. "I'd like that," he said. "But don't name it after me. Call it the warm meal." The sisters looked at each other, then smiled with wet eyes. "It will be done," Ilara said. "The Warm Meal Academy, where future leaders learn that helping others is the first strength." And so it was. The Warm Meal Academy opened 2 years later, built beneath the great tree of peace. Students came from every corner of space, dressed in robes of green and silver. They carried books, but also bowls, because every student began their journey by offering a warm meal to someone in need, no matter their background, species, or status. It became a ritual, a tradition, a sacred act. The lesson was simple. Start with kindness, the rest will follow. John didn't live forever. One morning he passed away in his sleep, smiling, a cup of tea still warm beside him. He left behind no great riches, no famous inventions, no royal blood. But he left behind a legacy so vast it couldn't be measured. He left behind stars that remembered, sisters who rose to power with love in their hearts, and a school that taught 1,000 worlds what it meant to care. At his funeral, held beneath the great tree, beings of every shape and language gathered. They didn't speak in speeches or read long stories. Instead, each one brought a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, or a small potato. They placed them in silence at the foot of his statue, one hand holding a spoon, the other resting gently on a carved rock. And in the wind they could almost hear his voice. "Come in, it's warm here." And across the stars, from forgotten moons to golden cities, the story of a man who fed 2 hungry girls lived on. Not as myth, not as legend, but as truth, passed down in kitchens, told at campfires, and taught in every classroom of the Warm Meal Academy, and in the hearts of all who heard it. One seed was planted, that even the smallest kindness could change the galaxy.